I'd like to welcome you all to our departing session of the fantastic virtual conference. It's been an exciting week plus a day, and I hope you all have enjoyed it as much as we have. It's some of you were late coming into the conference, but it's good to see you here now. Some of you have been throughout, regular attenders, and we're glad to see that. Dr. Miller is Director of First Year Learning Initiative and Professor of Psychological Sciences at Northern Arizona University. And I'm sure you've all read her bio on the website by now, so I won't go through that. What has been apparent to me through this process is what a tremendous individual Dr. Miller is. She's been in attendance at many of our sessions, has contributed in discussions, has generated ideas. We bounced our ideas off her. We have shared together through many, many sessions here. So she's really become, I guess, a friend of Fantastic. Or a fantastic friend, if you prefer. So we really appreciate her participation. We're looking forward to this. Before we get started, we do want to give away a couple of her books. So in order to do that, we're just doing a random number generator based on the people that are in here right now. So if you'll bear with me just a second, we'll see what happens. If I can get there. I need an assistant for this. Okay, Maya Johnson is the first one. Maya, jump up and down. We can't give it to you right here. We'll have to mail it to you, though. If you'll hang on a second, I'll write that down. Cool, we got one more we're going to give away. Well, that one came up on Michelle, so I don't think she needs her own book. Okay, this one's easier. David Corso. Congratulations, David. We've got one more book we'll give away later with the door prizes in the session following this. Dr. Michelle Miller.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here today in this really cool, interesting environment, and would commend Patrick as well for his incredible hospitality and patience in and working us into this environment. You know, it has been a new experience for me. Just as a little aside. I explained to my 9-year-old daughter, you know, where mommy was going all this time to these. You guys would say, oh, I have to go catch my conference presentation. And she knew I wasn't away at a conference, so I had to explain to her, it's kind of like Club Penguin for grown-ups. Now, some of you will get that, and you'll know what I mean. So yes, I'm a cognitive psychologist by training. That's my teaching background. That's been my research background as well. However, lately, a lot of my research has focused on applying and translating this kind of research, selecting what's most useful so that we can put it in the hands of people like yourselves who are out there on the front lines of innovation, devising new ways to reach our students. So, you know, technology comes, technology goes. But what I'm going to be focusing on today are a couple of what I feel are enduring principles about how the mind and brain allow us to create learning and literally change students' minds as they learn. So we may not be focusing as much on, this technology or that tool. I mean, who knows what's even going to be around. By the time this talk is over, there may be some brand new interesting technologies that have come around. But I want us to focus on some big picture principles that will allow us to, not just today, but throughout our careers, to choose the approaches that are going to be the most effective and the most compelling for our students. So a couple of goals here today. So first off, of course, I want to spark your interest as teaching and learning professionals in how what we know about the mind can guide our instructional choices. So in the brief time we have, I hope to spark that curiosity. I want to illustrate a few principles that you'll see in hopefully a memorable fashion, and leave you with some, of course, usable insights that you can start using even today to make those design and delivery choices. But I do have one other sort of little ulterior motive as well. So imagine that. I'm a psychologist and I have ulterior motives. Who would have thought it? But I want you to perhaps be interested in going back to really evangelize to some of your colleagues, even administrators sometimes, who are still, not really clear on what we do or the effectiveness of what we do. Right? So I want to get you fired up and put some new kinds of tools in your arsenal to get that message out to people that, what we do is not just a pale imitation of that face-to-face experience. It's something new, it's something different, and in many cases, it allows us options that we never even had, that we never had before in teaching and learning. So that's my stance. I hope that gets us off to a good start. We'll have a little time for Q&A at the end, but we're also going to have some give and take. And here too, this is going to be interesting to carry this off in this environment. All right, so our first stop here, we're going to be breaking down, as I said, a couple different principles. And, the three areas that I think are the most germane to us as teachers are three within cognition. So that's memory, attention, and higher thought processes, because, of course, it doesn't just stop at memory and knowledge. So we're going to talk about memory first, and we're also going to talk about attention, very wrapped up in very much the same package, because as you'll see, those two things are highly intertwined. So, a good first stop, you might think, would be to talk about memory theory. So how does memory really work? So we're going to start with a little bit of background on that. So many of you may have encountered something like this as far as our conception of how human memory works. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to try to use my handy laser pointer here to point out some of the more salient features of this type of memory theory. So under this conception, memory is a little bit like an assembly line, right? So information comes in here through our senses, eyes, ears primarily. There's a very brief storage stop where it spends a little bit of time. Most of it is gone, right, within a few seconds. Some of this lucky information gets transferred to this little box called short-term memory, which can't hold very much, although you can keep it alive through this process of rehearsal. Okay, so if you've ever run around looking for a pencil or your cell phone to write down a phone number, and you've said it to yourself over and over and over, then you've engaged in rehearsal. Some of this information, some small fraction, especially if it's been rehearsed, gets transferred to long-term memory, and then we can dump it back into short-term memory to use it. All right? So that is, as I said, one theoretical concept of memory. Now, go ahead and raise your virtual hand if you've seen or have some familiarity with a theory kind of like that. Anybody? Okay, so those three boxes, memory makes those stops. Okay, very good. Now, here's one of the things that I think, really the first thing you should know about this type of theory is that nobody who works in memory research anymore actually literally believes it's true. We really don't. So this three-box theory, this assembly line theory, it came around in about 1968, which is actually when I came on the scene, and I am not that young. So while this theory was extremely influential, and you see some echoes of this concept still here today, Nobody believes that it's this simple anymore. We also realize that it's not just things like rehearsal that move things into permanent storage, and that we oftentimes encode things that don't have to hang around in short-term memory at all. So I guess that's my first little kind of buyer beware point, is that if you are engaged in some type of learning theory or technology, and it's based on that three-box idea, that's a bit of a red flag. Now, the problem with all this is that there isn't one simple memory theory that fits on a page and is super intuitive that I can give you instead and say, this is the theory of how memory actually works. So what I can do, however, is highlight a few of the things that contemporary theories of memory emphasize, and we will tie these into our technologies in a little bit. So first off, while nobody still believes that memory works on these little passive holding tanks that just pass information back and forth, we do tend to believe very much in the concept of working memory. And sometimes this also is related to something called the multi-store concept. The idea is that memory is not so much one thing, one place where information is. It's a system of different components that work together to hold information while you're using it, to pull out of storage what you need when you need it. So for example, if you've ever heard of the idea that, we have a storage buffer for verbal information and then we have one for visual information, and they're kind of loosely coordinated but not the same thing, that's a concept of working memory. And working memory is also emphasizes the limitations we have, especially if you're using the same type of capacity during one task. So I'm going to have a lot of trouble, for example, juggling two tasks that are demanding of my visual spatial working memory, or two that are demanding of my verbal working memory. So that concept is still very much in force. Contemporary theories, people who are working today also have really come around to the idea of looking at memory not as just this holding tank, but as a set of systems that helps us survive in our environment. All right, so memory can't be divorced from all the things that memory is for. So memory is there to help us hang on to and get back information that is likely to help us accomplish our goals, that is likely to help us survive in an environment, and it's also context sensitive, so that I'll remember the things I need in the right context. And contemporary theories emphasize, as we'll especially demonstrate in a minute, the relationship between working memory and attention. So there are, in fact, several influential theorists today who say that we can't even separate working memory and attention, that maybe those are actually even the same thing. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But we all know that without attention, there's not a whole lot that goes on in memory. Those two things drive one another. And lastly, we still really emphasize the relationship between existing knowledge and our ability to bring in new knowledge. So we know now that it's not just a matter of what did I rehearse, what hung around in short-term memory, but what can I connect to the structures and ideas that I already have in mind? And this is one that, we won't demonstrate quite as much because it's probably not news to an audience like this, but I did want to just put that out there is one of the things that we're sensitive to in today's memory theories. So, attention. This is really where it's at. Attention is the driver of many, many cognitive processes, and especially memory and working memory. And I think that this becomes particularly apparent, and it really drives the point home when we think about how much we remember or not when there's not focused attention. So there's one demonstration in particular. You may have seen one somewhat like this in one context or another, but it's one that I think we can show to our students, and it does really give us that memorable idea that, not a whole lot goes on in the background or by osmosis or however you want to characterize passive learning without attention. So I am going to take a big risk here in this virtual environment. I'm going to go over here to a web page that I've loaded and show a demonstration. We're actually going to try to run this over the web. So in a second, probably be good if people could zoom in on that, your right hand screen if you haven't done so already. So what I'm going to be showing over there is a demonstration of a very robust and very memorable effect called change blindness. And there are many, many demonstrations of this up on the web. If you just kind of Google change blindness, you can find tons of them, and they're great. The one that we will be looking at today is graciously maintained online by one of the scientists who discovered this effect, J. Kevin O'Regan. So we're going to be looking at some of his classic examples. And again, not quite sure about the vagaries of how these will all stream online, but we'll give it a shot. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up myself. Right? Okay, so don't worry too much about the text on this website, but I'm going to show you a couple of pictures that are actually pairs of pictures, and you've got one job as you look at these, and this is to figure out what changes from one version of the picture to the other. And physically, these are fairly large changes, but what's incorporated in there is what they're terming here a flicker. Now, what the flicker does, it's not a glitch of the internet or anything like that. What it does is it momentarily interrupts your attention to that scene. And you'll see that it demonstrates how little we retain from one version to the next. So let's see. Here's one. Okay. Now, it may take you... Okay, do we have a technical issue with the website? Okay, here we go. May take you a little bit to notice what the change is. If you haven't been able to detect it yet, I'm going to see if, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not, but the reflection of the barn in the water.
Michelle?
Yes.
We're not seeing it here. It's not working for us.
Goodness, okay. Well, I'm going to have to... Sometime. All right, no problem. I'm going to have to assign this as homework, okay? Do we have that? All right, so what you'll notice when you look at change blindness demonstrations, and again, there are many great ones, and you'll have this, this URL in the materials if you'd like to download that later. What this really dramatizes is that it's very, very difficult to notice changes when you have a momentary interruption of attention. And but there's one exception to this. And this is when the thing that changes is part of what we call the central interest of the picture. So in other words, if it's something that is involved with what the picture is about, the theme of the picture, what we're seeking in the picture to extract as information, then voila, we notice the changes, which then tells us we have formed, at least temporarily, a memory representation of it. If it's not part of our central interest, we don't direct focused attention to it, and it's like it never happened. All right, so this is one that you can present to your students online or even face-to-face to say, look, guys, if you think that you can be texting and on social networking and things will just sort of soak in the background, you're quite wrong about that. So this is a big theoretical point that I think everybody needs to incorporate into our teaching. And when we think about it, you know, students and many people as well have a very different kind of folk theory about how and why we remember things. If you ask a lot of your students, you know, why do you remember some things and forget others, they say, well, I remember things that I've seen a lot, right? And that shows in their study techniques, which is I'm going to scroll through this website over and over and over, or, you know, keep highlighting my textbook, and it will get through. But mass exposure, we know, does very, very little to drive memory. So I'm going to ask for another hand raise here. How many people were present and recalled Dr. Z's presentation where he showed an array of United States pennies? Hand raise? Raise from anybody? Okay. All right. So we have, yeah. So what Dr. Z did is he replicated a classic study in cognitive psychology where you ask individuals to either draw or choose multiple choice different versions of United States pennies. And the bottom line is, even though we've seen them thousands and thousands of times, we don't really know what they look like. outside of, the very big gross details of the size and the color and so forth. We get very, very confused if we try to figure out, oh, right, is Lincoln wearing a hat and where does it say in God we trust? We don't know those details. We simply don't. And this is another that you can run with students, and I oftentimes do. It works wonderfully. It's very interactive. You can run it online or face-to-face. And then you ask them, why is it that you have seen this so many times and you cannot recall it? And here's where I'd actually like some folks here to chime in. Let's get a couple of opinions. If I put you on the spot and say, why is it that you've seen a penny so many times and you don't know what it looks like? What's the answer? Any intuitive ideas of why it is that we don't know what pennies actually looks like? Go ahead, Maya.
We really only pay attention to things that we need to know or we think we need to know.
Great. So Maya pointed out it's kind of a need-to-know basis. So remember what it said about memory is there not to just take in information. It's there to help us accomplish our goals. Well, if it doesn't accomplish our goals, if it doesn't relate to what we want to accomplish, then why should we remember it? Right? Our capacities are limited and we want to direct them in places that are going to pay off. So, the students need to have this principle in mind as they study so that they can get the most out of their time. However, they do engage in a great deal of passive exposure, particularly with respect to self-testing. We'll get into this now. So another little hand raise. How many people have heard of or are familiar with the testing effect? Testing effect. Okay, good. So a few people. This is one of the biggest pieces of news in applied memory research that we've come up with in the last 10 years or so. It really is. So this refers to this extremely robust finding that, minute for minute of time invested, you get a better payoff from testing than virtually any other study activity you could do. And, while certain kinds of tests are more effective than others, they're all pretty good. So this could be self-testing, it can be multiple choice, it can be short answer. Testing is a great way to practice. And this is especially true when we also use these tests to do so-called spaced or distributed practice. All right, so that's a pretty intuitive principle that if I've got 2 hours to study, I'm better with 2 one-hour sessions or even, 4 half-hour sessions than a whole big chunk of block practice. And interleaved practice refers to the idea that I get another little boost in effectiveness when I mix up different kinds of examples. So, for example, if I'm working on different kinds of statistics problems, t-tests, chi-square, if you know statistics, those sorts of things, I'm better off working on those problems interleaved instead of focusing on a big sequence of the same kind of one. So we know a whole lot about the effective forms of practice to counterbalance the passive exposure. Now, I think that it's also very important for us to keep in mind that students are not going to spontaneously engage in these, right? That's very, very unlikely. So it's up to us to structure our online and face-to-face experiences so that we get students doing the testing. So as it shows here, in one recent study, survey of college students led by Jeff Karpicki, who's done a lot of the testing effect research, what they did, they surveyed students on what their favorite strategies and study strategies were. And you can see that what is the number one? Rereading. That if you have the choice of spending your time, how are you going to spend that time? I want to reread the chapter. So that's what most students will do left to their own devices. Very, very few, tiny proportion of the students said that, oh, I prefer to self-test. All right. So drives it home that it's up to us to make sure that these effective strategies are actually used. So here's a couple of takeaways in memory before we move on to some thought processes. So first off, of course, let's get out of this mentality that we just dump things into memory. And let's think of it as a set of mechanisms that are, as Maya said, on a need-to-know basis, taking in and getting back goal-relevant information. If you don't have students' attention, you're not going to get through to them. All right, especially if you're in a distracting online environment, this becomes a real concern. So things like getting students to respond, okay, requiring them to respond to what you're presenting or the interaction at different intervals will help capture that attention. And retrieval practice, that testing effect, is particularly powerful, and we owe it to our students to use that as much as possible. So how does technology help? So technology does things that you simply can't do or can't do very easily in a traditional face-to-face pencil and paper sort of approach. So more opportunities to take advantage of that testing effect. We can intersperse all kinds of formal and informal, high stakes, low stakes, different formats of retrieval practice in our learning activities. We can do things like set up repeatable quizzes that randomly sample out of large databases of questions so that students get lots of experience with tests, not just as a way to assess what they learned, but also as a way to actually promote the learning itself. So we have those opportunities that we do not have because those quizzes, those interspersed opportunities are very cumbersome face-to-face. So we also have the opportunity to space practice and interleave it in a much more planful way. That traditional face-to-face class, students may be engaging with your material 3, maybe even 2, or even 1 time per week. But online, we can say, on Saturdays we're going to have a synchronous discussion, and on Monday you've got your repeatable quiz, and Friday you've got your reflection paper. So let's take advantage of that affordance of an online environment to do that, and to get students out of the habit of doing one kind of problem, one type of material at a time. All right, and let's get them interleaving that material, which becomes a more effective way to take advantage of memory. And lastly, there are more opportunities for aligning material with individual learners' existing knowledge and their goals. So here's where I also want to throw it out to the audience for just a second. So let's see, who can volunteer, just an idea of how they, in an online learning environment, align what they are presenting with what learners already know and what they're trying to get out of it. So just off the top, what's 1 or 2 ideas that people have that they do to align their material to the learners themselves, their knowledge and their goals? Yes, go ahead. I'm having a little trouble reading your name tag, but go ahead and unmute yourself and jump right in. Yes. Tom, are you unmuted right now?
Just unmuted. Thank you very much. Yeah, one of the things that we do is we try to work from students' own experiences, and as we scaffold skill levels, we begin each skill with, well, how did you use what you learned before to make it more immediate?
Right. Okay, so you're quite explicit in saying, okay, students, you tell me what you did before, and then put it on them to link it. And I always like that as a strategy, put it on the students themselves. Anybody else would like to contribute the idea of this personalization, aligning with what they already know? Right. Well, perhaps this can be a topic for further conversation with our colleagues. So we're going to move on to, Val, go ahead.
I was going to say I do a similar thing, but I usually, in the discussions, get people to say what they would do in the future, either about a political issue or in their own families or in their own workplace.
That's great. See, our capacity as humans to kind of project ourselves into that situation and project ourselves into the future, we have an amazing ability to do that. So why not take advantage of it and get people thinking, okay, what am I likely to do? How will this come in handy? And once they've endorsed it, they're more likely to apply it. Okay, so moving on to a couple things about higher thought processes. So knowledge and memory are extremely important, but that's not where learning stops, of course. So when cognitive psychologists consider thinking, they mean a range of different kinds of mental abilities and processes. And one broad category is reasoning, all right? So that could be things like making predictions, judging, applying rules, and verifying whether rules are being followed. And that's one part of what we may be trying to develop in our student, that reasoning ability. Now, this might seem, to a novice teacher to be pretty simple. You just tell students, I'm going to teach them some logic, show them how to think, and then we'll just assess how strong they are at it. But we know from research that there are some huge and fascinating quirks about how human thought processes work that make this kind of easier said than done. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to, all right, lost my slide here. All right. So what I'm going to do is ask you to engage in your virtual world in a little reasoning task that'll illustrate a few of the things that we have to think of when we're teaching students how to think. So I'm going to ask you to engage in something that we're going to call a rule verification task, right? And what I'm going to be asking you to do is think about what information you would need to gather to know that a rule is being followed. In other words, is this rule true or is this rule false? So I'm going to make this kind of concrete, and I want you to imagine, I'll show you a depiction in a second, a set of cards, right? I'm going to show you a picture that's going to represent a set of cards out on a table. And there's one piece of information on the front and another piece of information on the back. And you'll be needing to think about what cards you would check to get the information about the rule. So which cards would you have to flip over in order to know if this rule is being followed? And this will be a little confusing. You should be about 80% confused while you're doing this task. So don't worry if it's challenging. It's kind of supposed to be. All right. So here's our rule. Okay. So the rule that we're going to verify first is this. If a card has an odd number on one side, all right, it has an animal on the other side. So we've got our cards here, and they're showing either a number or some type of an object. We've got cards 1 through 4. Card 1, we've got an odd number. Card 2, we've got an even number. Card 3, we've got an animal. Card 4, we've got a non-animal. So we think, what would happen if we kind of ponder which cards would be useful to flip over to figure out if this rule is true or false, and conversely, which ones are not going to help us at all. So, okay, let's think about this. So imagine we flipped over card number 1, all right? Had an odd number on one side, and oh, look, it doesn't have an animal on the other side. Okay, maybe that's pretty useful to know. What if we flip card number 2? Well, it's got an animal on one side. It had an even number on the other side. Not so sure if that's useful. Card number 3, it's got an animal. What kind of number has it got on the other side? And card number 4, a non-animal with an odd number on one side. Now, that kind of sort of taxes one's mental capacities, right? How many people, go ahead and raise your hand, feel a little bit confused by that reasoning task? Okay? Buddy, feel a little bit confused? Okay, so you probably have some gut feelings about which cards are useful or not useful. Is there anybody who feels particularly unsure about those cards in the middle? Go ahead and raise your hand if you weren't quite sure whether you ought to be flipping the cards in the middle. Yeah. Okay, so this reasoning task can be pretty challenging, and kind of shows that reasoning is sometimes hard even for very intelligent people. Well, that's okay. So we'll try another one, and we'll see how you do with this one. So let's try this particular rule. If a person is drinking alcohol, that person is over 21 years old. Okay, different rule, same setup of the task. So let's check this out here. So here we've got cards that show us either a type of beverage or an age of a person. So here's a case where we can flip over a card that says beer. We can do that. Oh, beer with somebody who isn't over 21. They got a 17-year-old on the other side. That's a pretty useful card, right? Somebody's drinking juice. Should we check them? Should we see their age? Maybe that's not as helpful. Somebody who's 30, should we check their beverage? Not really. Somebody who's 19 years old, well, that's a different story. So how many people think that we ought to flip over cards number 1 and card number 9, or card number 4? So the first card and the last card. Okay, so how many people felt a little bit more confident with that second rule? Yeah, so most people will find they feel a little bit better about the reasoning task. So here's the gimmick, is that these are both exactly the same task. They're set up the same way, and you should flip over the same cards, right? And yet, the same person will behave very differently in one versus the other. So let's get somebody's intuition about why that is. So why do you do better with the second type of task, or the second task? Verifying the alcohol and age rule. Yes, David. Anybody want to go ahead and unmute themselves and put out an intuition for why they might have done better with the second task?
It has to do with the context.
Okay, so the context is different. So it's an abstract reasoning task, and yet we cannot divorce it from the context that we're in. And some of you might also think, well, I've had experience with the second rule. I have that rule in my memory. And if you think that, you're about 95% right. It turns out we actually store in our memories what are called permission schemas. And that's just knowledge about how this type of rule in the world tends to work. So actually, you might have done a lot better in the first task if I had given you some kind of a cover story or justification about why do animals have to go with odd numbers or even numbers? So we store those things in our memory, and when it comes time to reason, we cannot always take ourselves out of that context. So I think that that is kind of the first moral of this story, is that, like our students, we're asking them to sometimes jump into unfamiliar context, and we say, well, why can't they think? Well, thinking is context dependent. And even very intelligent people, some kinds of reasoning just do not come naturally to us. So that is one thing that I think that we can take home as a message for our teaching. So moving on to some other issues in higher reasoning. So some other big challenges in reinforcing thinking skills, besides the fact that it's just difficult and context-bound, this is the problem of creating effective transfer. All right. So similar to this issue that we just saw illustrated, thing is that even if you've learned a skill, if you've learned a set of reasoning abilities, those may not jump into the next context very well at all. Even changing just some of the superficial details of a problem can sometimes throw students way, way off. And this is a big one for education, right? Because what is education if not getting our work to transfer into the real world? I mean, we want our students to use what we teach them everywhere, in the next class, in their personal lives, at the ballot box. That's what we really, really want. But transfer is almost always more difficult and more fraught with all kinds of barriers than we assume as teachers. So transfer is one of the issues you need to be thinking about if you're going to be building thinking skills in your students. And here's another one. And this is the fact that, while knowledge complements thinking skills, certainly, thinking skills don't just fall out of content knowledge, right? And I think most of us kind of know that, but we teach as though this is true. So, for example, back in the days when I was a novice teacher in Introduction to Psychology, if you'd asked me, what do you want students to get out of Intro Psych more than anything else? I would say, I want them to understand how scientists use data to draw conclusions. All right. I want them to learn to think critically and scientifically about human behavior. But what did I spend all my time doing in the design? I taught them about other people's studies, right? And at the end of the semester, I'm kind of implicitly thinking, well, I guess now they've learned about everybody else's research, they're going to be able to do that themselves. And it does not work that way. Okay. Doesn't mean that, we're going to get rid of all that content knowledge, but we need to very planfully go to that next step. If we want students to be learning to think, they have to be doing those activities in the class. All right. So transfer is hard, and it doesn't just come out of content knowledge. These are the challenges to us. Now, with problem solving, this is another type of thing that we want our students to be able to do. All right, so maybe another quick raise of hands. How many people count problem solving as one of the things that they want their students to come away with? Or problem solving the discipline, right? Okay. Now, this is one where, unlike formal reasoning, human beings tend to be a little bit better. All right, so the picture's a little bit rosy, but still, there's some things we know about how to promote better problem solving and how to improve it. So let's look at a couple of the key concepts that all teachers should know about. So you can think of problem solving almost with a spatial metaphor. Okay, so solving a problem is kind of like you're at point A, you need to be at point B, and if it's a decent difficulty problem, you can't just go directly from one to the other. There are different obstacles that I have to go around. So things like constraints, resources I might have, rules that I have to follow. But also what's very, very important for problem solving is so-called structural elements. And this is a concept that pops up over and over in all kinds of different teaching and learning challenges, is structural elements. So when we think about structural elements, what that really means. Here's how psychologists would think about it. So structural elements are those underlying components of the problem. The resources we have, the rules we have to follow, the constraints that are there that drive our solutions. And overlaying that is all kinds of details that don't matter. So let me throw out just a little example for you. Let's say that I am trying to drive to campus, and I've got to go there because I have this space committee meeting, and I hate this committee, and it's so boring. But, I have this presentation. I might get some more office space for my colleagues, and they're going to love that. But then my old green Toyota 4x4 belches this black smoke, and it dies. And I've got 20 minutes to get to campus. I'm 3 miles away. And I've got a cell phone with 20% battery and $8 in my pocket and a credit card. Okay, that's one big messy problem. But this is a problem that many of you are experts in solving. So let's get some hands. What are some maybe structural elements of that problem? Components that really, really matter to your solution. What matters about that problem? Let's get a hand and say, okay, what's one example of a structural element of that problem? Yes, go ahead, Marion. Okay, would Marion like to speak? Anybody else? So what do you think is a really important aspect of that problem? Out of all those details I laid on you about the meeting and the car and the distance and the time, what's important about the problem? Well, we conversely, maybe you can flip it around and say, what are some aspects of that problem that are superficial, that do not matter? Anything? Anything you can think of? Okay. Yes, go ahead, Renee.
That the meeting you're going to is boring?
Oh, yes. Okay. And that may be a really salient fact to me as I'm thinking about it. I mean, I'm like, oh, I hate this committee, but that won't help me solve the problem, right? There are things that will help me solve it, and there are things that won't. So, yes, Patrick.
The boring meeting just means you don't have to be in a hurry about anything else, so you got time.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, so it probably, somebody else, there might be some nuance here where it probably doesn't matter. But see, as experts, drilling down to those structural elements is what really allows us to be effective. And if you think about it, it also relates to transfer. Because this is the same problem in a way as, being, trying to get on a flight where your connection is late, trying to get to your daughter's play, but the subway is broken. There's all kinds of different combinations that really come down to that same set of issues. What's my money? What's my time? What's my distance? And how do I make those things work together? You as an expert get that, a novice gets sidetracked. So one last form of thinking that I think we all want to orient ourselves towards is critical thinking. Okay. Now, one of the things with critical thinking that is a bit of a challenge right off the bat is there is no one common definition. But that's okay. So, for example, if you're working with faculty and they're saying, I want my students to have critical thinking more than anything else, you want to drill down a little bit and say, okay, what does that mean to you in your discipline? Because it isn't just one thing. But there are some other barriers as well. So a couple of barriers that tend to come up to critical thinking that we know of from research, and I can attest from working with a lot of faculty myself. So one of the things that gets in the way of critical thinking in our students, where they do that superficial thinking that we hate, is failing to foreground deep structure. So, for example, let's say that I throw it out to my psychology students, a problem having to do with charter schools in my area. Let's say that, studies come out that shows that charter school students have higher test scores. Well, great. Does that mean that going to charter school gets you better test scores? Well, students may be off on the surface details of like, oh, I like charter schools. Oh, I went to a charter school. Oh, I don't like them. None of that matters. This is really a causation and correlation problem. Okay. You can't say that, going to the school caused higher test scores when people can opt in and out of them, and different people may opt in than not. So I want them to go to the bottom of the deep structure, forget what you think about the schools, and tell me the real part of this problem. So when students don't foreground deep structure, they don't think. Critical thinking is also knowing when to do it, not just how to do it. So students need to know, oh, right, this is one of the times when I need to step back from my opinion and go, oh, yes, it's one of those causation correlation problems that Dr. Miller is trying to teach me about. It is more effortful. We all know that. It's a lot easier just to, sit and ruminate about what we think about it. But going beneath to those structural elements takes mental effort. And, there is this other issue that sometimes students have other motivations to maintain a logical belief. So, for example, if I'm asking them to think critically about whether ESP exists or astrology exists, they may have some attachments to those issues that prevent them from really being able to detach and look at it in a more objective way. So critical thinking is another area where the first issue for us as teachers is realizing how hard it's going to be to teach. So a couple of takeaways to flow into how do we choose our right technologies and the right approaches that will help us reinforce these things. Now, first off is that point that content knowledge is absolutely important, but that is not going to create the thinking skills you want. Students need practice at that, particularly with those kinds that don't come naturally, like critical thinking or formal reasoning. Identifying structural elements of problems is what leads to success. Being able to filter the relevant from the irrelevant. And it's practice, practice, practice. Here we, as teachers, we almost always underestimate how much practice students are going to need. And this practice is most effective when we give them examples where the structural elements are common, but the surface elements are varied, especially if we do want them to think critically. Now, for those of us teaching with technology, I think the number one advantage here of technology and what we ought to be building into our designs is this expanded options for practice, right? If I'm in class and that's pretty much what I'm relying on, I can assign a little bit of group work, put up an example on the board, and that's it. But thinking skills are so hard to build that we need those online opportunities for students to try again and again and again to demonstrate the skills that we want. All right, so it goes far beyond the traditional homework that we've sent students home with, or a few case studies. we can do as many as are needed to build student mastery. So that's one thing I think we should really, really take advantage of. Okay, and before we get back to more of those advantages, I actually want to build in a couple of examples. So just to give a concrete example of some things that we can do or use, things that are out there that give this practice. So in disciplines where it's important for students to be able to break down arguments, you know, what's a claim, what's evidence, and so forth, there's software that is actually geared to do just that. So this rationale program, for example, has a drag and drop interface where students can break up an argument that's being made and visualize the different parts of it. And if that's something we want students to be able to do, well, that's the sort of activity they need to be engaged in that class. In my discipline, we do need students to really be able to look at data and say, well, what patterns of data support different claims? So there's this causality lab software that allows students to, you know, actually generate pretend data, hypothetical data, and map that onto, you know, is my hypothesis supported or not? Now, the cool thing is because it's a simulation, you can run it over and over and over. You can change the parameters a little bit, you can change the study design a little bit, and just see what happens. No need to be in an actual physical lab for the entire semester trying to gather data. Collaborative annotation tools. So many faculty tell me, you know, I really want my students to be able to read critically. Okay, well, what do? Well, I send them home with articles to read, and then I see if they thought critically. Well, that's not really the same as giving them practice doing it. But by having them, for example, annotate and comment on a document, they can work together to say, well, this is the part I thought was really persuasive, or here's where I think the author really goes beyond the available evidence. So if you want them to do it, let's actually make them accountable for doing it and use some tools that make their thought processes visible. And there are probably many, many others, discipline-specific, that you can perhaps exchange after the talk. All right, so think about how technology ties us to thinking skills. You know, technology can also give us much more systematic presentation of problems than we typically have in a more traditional environment. So, for example, if we want to show two problems that have common underlying structure or common underlying elements that are important, we could create graphics that actually have, show the linkages. For example, a math problem where the steps align side by side so students can really obviously see here's what they have in common. So graphic tools for actually illustrating the correspondences among problems can be very powerful for getting students to that point where they can see underneath the surface and transfer like we want them to. And lastly, the opportunity for reflection and deliberation. This is one that research has shown ties particularly to critical thinking skills. And it's one where online exchanges are ideally suited to what we want students to do. So, of course, face-to-face discussions are very compelling, but, they can be very hasty and certain students dominate. In the online environment, as many of you, of course, know and see every day, every student has an opportunity to jump in. We make everybody accountable to explain not just what they believe or what they think, but why. And to do that with more time to think about it. So here's where things like setting up discussions can really assist in that aim. So getting students to explain what their conclusion is and why they think that. When we use that affordance of technology, we can get some very, very powerful results. So I think we have come to the end of what I had planned for us to talk about today. And I think we do have a few moments for interaction and questions. So Patrick, I'm going to turn it over to you again as our moderator.
Well, Michelle, you're the expert, so we want to make sure that
yes.
people have the opportunity to ask those questions. Okay. So does anyone have anything here? Now, there are two microphones in the back. You will see kind of virtual microphones, but they actually work. So in this crowd, and especially if you're near the back, you need to step to those. And when you get in the little circle, it will amplify your voice. Either that, or you can right-click, go to voice, and change it to shout. You won't actually shout, but everyone will be able to hear you just like you were on the stage.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so let's hear it. What are some questions, comments, examples? If you have examples of practices that you think fit with some of these principles of mind and brain, I really do want to hear those as well. So let's hear from you, crowd. Oh, yes, go ahead. Let's see, Ruth, did you have a question or comment?
I do. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
What role does learning styles play into this, or into the technical environment?
Okay, so Ruth is asking what role learning styles has, and you know, as a cognitive psychologist, that's an interesting question for me. Now, the idea of learning styles, I think first of all, we have to clarify what we mean, and what most individuals seem to mean when they use that term is things like visual learning, auditory learning, and kinesthetic learning. And within cognitive psychology, we really don't believe that idea at all, at least not in the sense that matching an individual's learning style is useful for promoting learning. So, you know, partly this is because of some really detailed empirical work that's been done that actually, you know, assigns people to different presentation modes in a very controlled way, depending on how they score on learning styles tests, you know, finding that matching the style does not help. So that's part of it. You know, and for us psychologists, it's also always seemed to be a kind of a hinky idea just because of how the brain massively shares information, you know, within microseconds among different modalities. And then you have the case of something like reading. Well, is reading visual or is it auditory? Well, you're using your eyes to do it, but we know from reading research and neuroscientific research about reading that that's really engaging your, you know, auditory speech areas. Even if you don't realize it, your auditory ears are just percolating along with that. So, you know, to say that information kind of comes in a modality and stays that way, you know, to us does not seem real plausible. So I think that moving students away from that idea is important. But that said, we do know a great deal about how different modalities, different sensory modalities, different ways of presentations tend to work better for most people. Now, I always kind of direct people to the real source of what I think is the best work on different kinds of sensory multimedia, and that is Richard E. Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R. He's an incredibly prolific researcher who has done really detailed work showing, for example, you know, how to set up diagrams that are really effective. So when you set up diagrams where it's stuff down to, you know, putting the labels right really close to where they are and, you know, should you have audio narration or not. He's done all that work. So and he has some wonderful, you know, different kinds of, he pitches the research, you know, not just in journals, but he's also made a lot of books kind of for the rest of us that boil down his research into some usable principles. So I guess in short, don't worry about learning styles. Do take advantage of the different capabilities we have to present audio, video, a lot of variety for everybody, and check out what Richard E. Mayer has to say for some really detailed design principles. So I hope that helps address your question. Right. That was a good question. Do we have another intrepid volunteer who will unmute and come forward for another question or comment? Yes, is that Marion in the back? Go ahead. Question or comment? I'm not hearing.
Remember, you need to step to the microphone or put your voice on shout. Yes, as Tom said, very hard to hear without the mics, especially if you're on the other side of the room.
Oh, Marion, I'm sorry, you're having apparently she's having mic problems.
She could come over and use mine.
Okay.
She's about 10 feet away from me.
Oh, okay.
Or you can text your questions.
That's right.
Press T
That's right.
and type them in.
Press T and type, yes. Okay. If anybody else who wants to...
Yeah. Either you spellbound them, Michelle, or they're here for the door prizes.
I know, probably here for the door prizes. Well, let me just reiterate, everybody, that it has been so wonderful to get the different perspectives. And, you know, this is my favorite thing to talk about with teachers who are out there in all kinds of environments with all kinds of students. So please don't hesitate to contact me, you know, tweet at me, or send me an email anytime with other questions that come to you later on. And I thank Patrick again so much for the invitation and the inclusion to this wonderful event.
Thank you, Michelle. You've been a great supporter throughout. Oh, wait a minute. There's one from Nina.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And I think mine just disappeared. So attention. Great.
Wait a minute. I'll get that up for you.
Okay.
Or
right.
for
So
me.
you can. Great. You can relay it out to the rest of the crowd as well. Did it have to do with scheduling classes? Is that?
Oh, here's Marion's too. Nina said, attention is so important, so how long do you suggest we schedule classes?
Oh, my goodness. Well, you know, and here, cognitive psychologists tend to shy away from this idea of, oh, you have an attention span of X number of minutes. Well, you know, if you're doing something that is truly boring, you're going to be gone after a minute. But people can sit and watch a feature film that's compelling to them and be spellbound for 90 minutes. So it really does depend. But I think taking cues from the students, right? And this is something we do learn as we get more skilled as teachers. So taking our cues from the students about, you know, are they disengaged? Do they need a break? What kind of break is effective? I think too is another issue. The ages of your students. I've learned that one the hard way, and I've learned that teaching a night class with graduate students who are largely adults in their 30s and 40s is going to be a little different than with the younger students. So I think it's about staying in touch with your students, looking for the feedback they're giving you about their attentiveness, switching gears, asking students to respond. All those things can tend to get us kind of, you know, get our energy spinning back up after it spins back down. So sorry, but I think I'm going to go with that instead of a, you know, X number of minutes is ideal. And sometimes you're teaching something like labs, you know, where, you know, it's really not practical to get them engaged in the activity, get them started. Sometimes you need a few hours, and that's just the way it goes. Right.
All right, Marion's was just a comment. She said she's glad to hear comments about repeating learning activities because that's a QM standard to have practice opportunities.
Yes.
So it's nice to know that
really
those have a
is.
foundation.
Right, and it's so easy just to do these one-shot, one-offs and think that, well, we taught it. You know, we showed it to them, now they can do it. They need a lot more practice. We all got where we are today, through a great deal of concerted practice. And we may have had a lot of guidance in that, and some of us haven't. But we know, as experts, what it takes to become proficient in the area. And we owe it to our students to offer them every opportunity to walk down that same path.
Let me back up to see what... Debbie, wait a minute, did I miss one? No. Debbie Van Nortwick says, for the self-testing, does it work to have students complete practice questions they select? For example, in nursing, they have the NCLEX prep books.
You know, so many parameters have been examined with the testing effect. I think you may have hit on one of the few that hasn't, self-selection of questions. However, the testing effect, I mean, part of why we make such a big deal about it is it's so incredibly robust. This thing is bomb-proof. So anything, if it looks like a test and feels like a test, then it's a good use of time. Here's a caveat, though, is that there is also this pronounced tendency that we have and our students are going to have to be overly optimistic about what they know and what they don't know. So there's this tendency to mistake what's called fluency. So feeling like, oh yeah, I got it, I remember that. Mistaking fluency for mastery. And so that would be my qualm about that, is are students going to consciously or unconsciously select the questions that they feel fluent on? What seems to be associated with learning and memory over and over and over is what they call desirable difficulty. That little kind of, that momentary, oh my gosh, I have to rack my brain. It's not comfortable. Many students don't like that feeling, but that feeling is what goes with learning. It's like a little signal that, aha, you're doing it. So if you feel like your students, for whatever reason, can induce that desirable difficulty through a selecting procedure like that, well, you're probably in safe territory, but that's what you do have to watch out for, because then you have unpleasant surprises when they have the, whatever the quote unquote real assessment is or real life application is, and they don't have that control, then they're going to wish that they had worked on the harder problems. So hopefully that illuminates some of the different considerations that I think you ought to think about in configuring that.
Anyone else? Debbie says thank you.
Nancy Warren, I didn't waving her hand. Oh, and you're very, very welcome. Debbie, thank you for coming.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Nancy. I had
Hi.
a question about how do you feel about gaming? Because a lot of K through 12 are pushing that. I was wondering about in higher ed.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Oh boy, this is a big one. I'm glad you brought that up. But out of interest of time, I didn't talk too much about that. So I think gaming and gamification is a wonderful idea, but people get so sidetracked on that superficial, does it look like a game part? Is there music? Is there characters? Is there something like that? The things that matter about gaming from a more of a psychological perspective don't have anything to do with all that bells and whistles stuff. What makes games game-like is, first off, the principle of flow, which many of you may be familiar with. And flow is sort of a complex idea, but basically it's, sort of a Goldilocks principle of difficulty. It's those activities where they're just hard enough to where we can succeed most of the time, but not so easy that it's, boring. And they also tend to have a lot of feedback. So activities where students are getting rapid feedback. Am I getting closer? Am I getting farther? How am I doing? And where challenge level are optimized, to me, that's a game. That's gamification right there, not the rest of it. So if we're focused on issues like flow, then that's really great. Other things about games, I would recommend a couple of readings that I think are really important. And yes, Flow. Thank you, Tom, for putting that in. So yes, the book Flow is a classic. Anybody who's interested in learning or motivation should read it. There's also a researcher named Michelle Dickey. It's Michelle with one L, not like me, but she wrote what I consider to be a classic set of articles a while back that just map out what do games and engaged learning have in common. And partly it's flow, and partly it's things like, being part of having some kind of a hook. Like if I'm doing a case study, what's my role? What am I trying to get out of this? So she lays those things out, and those, I think, K through 12 or higher learning, I think those are the principles to look for. And lastly, there's this great book that came out. I just think it's really underrated. It's called Reality is Broken. How games will, and it's got a long subtitle, sometimes like how games change us for the better and will change the world. And it just flips around so many questions about, how are games different than quote unquote real life? What could we, when can games actually accomplish serious things? And, I come at this as somebody who's a non-gamer. It's one of the reasons why this environment has been a real learning curve for me. But, as a non-gamer, I got to have a window into, just the magnitude of motivation and the amount of time and the compelling nature of a lot of these big game environments. So things like Halo, what causes people to get so involved in that? It's not just the shoot 'em up aspect of it, she argues. It's things like feeling a part of something bigger than oneself. So, I think gamification is amazing, but it makes me sad when we take a very, very superficial take on what that is. All right. Wow. That was a really good question. And I saw that a few things went by in the text, recommendations for the book. Jane McGonigal also has a TED talk that went by in the text. All of these are wonderful things that we can pick up on later and that I think will help all of our teaching.
Anyone else with a burning question at this point? Great. Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle, so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody, as well. I'm going to miss this environment, so I hope to see everybody next year.
Well, we'll leave your login open. You can drop in, but there won't be as many of us around.
All right.